Number 17. Satanic Slaughter. During the first months of the COVID lockdown in 2020, 27-year-old Nicole Smallman and 46-year-old Bieber Henry gathered with their older sister at a North London park to celebrate her birthday in a socially distanced fashion. But they were unaware that a deranged Satanist was crouched beneath some nearby foliage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. After all the other guests had left, 18-year-old Danielle Hussein emerged from the bushes and attacked Bieber Henry without warning, giving her no chance to defend herself. Once she was dead, Hussein moved on to Nicole Smallman, who fought ferociously for her life. Hussein was angry that the victim was defending herself, so he stabbed her 29 times. He then dragged the bodies into the nearby undergrowth and positioned them in a degrading fashion. Concerned friends and loved ones of the victims went to the police when they realized that Henry and Smallman were missing. When law enforcement failed to act in a quick fashion, the friends searched for the women themselves. It took them just minutes to find the bodies after arriving at the park. Hussein cut his hand during the attack and left blood at the scene, enabling police to obtain a DNA profile. It took several weeks for authorities to connect Hussein to the crime using a method called genetic genealogy, which investigators use to identify suspects through their relatives' DNA. Hussein was further implicated by surveillance footage from the day of the murder and other evidence. Detectives learned that Hussein apparently believed he'd made some sort of demonic pact that ensured he'd win millions in the lottery if he killed a certain number of women as a sacrifice to Satan. According to prosecutors, he likely would have murdered more victims if he hadn't hurt his hand while stabbing Henry and Smallman. In the end, Hussein was found guilty of both murders and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 35 years. Number 16. Brianna Keys. 18-year-old Brianna Keys was leaving her own birthday party after celebrating with family one night in 2022 when she and her boyfriend were shot. When officers responded to the home in Memphis, Tennessee, they learned from witnesses that someone had shot repeatedly out of a window of a car that came speeding down the street. The young woman's mother, Latrice Kennan, told local station WSAZ that Brianna was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and got caught in the crossfire of an unrelated conflict. In another interview with WREG, Kennan said that her younger children were nearby during the incident and were left shaken up by it. Keys took a bullet to the face and was rushed to the hospital, where her family learned that she faced a long road to recovery and would require multiple surgeries to repair her jaw. Shortly after the shooting, Kennan told WERG that Brianna was missing several teeth, had wires holding her jaw together, and had a track in her throat, an opening on the front of the neck to allow tubing to be inserted into the windpipe. Because of her injuries, she had to delay her plans to attend nursing school, and the rest of her life was put on hold. In the wake of the shooting, her family has called for more to be done to put an end to gun violence, which remains at a disturbing high throughout much of the United States. Brianna's boyfriend was also injured and was expected to survive, and while Kennan hoped the police would catch the shooters and bring them to justice, they unfortunately remain at large. Number 15. Thomas Jackson. While celebrating his birthday in Davenport, Florida during the pre-dawn hours one day in 2022, 35-year-old Thomas Jackson got into an altercation with another individual that ended in violence. It all started when he and his girlfriend began arguing while drinking with another couple at around 2:30 a.m. Jackson's friend took him outside to calm down, and just moments later, the two women heard gunshots. They rushed outside to find Jackson standing over his friend's motionless body with a handgun laying on the ground nearby. There was little they could do to help the victim, who died from his injuries. Jackson reportedly claimed that his friend came at him, but Polk County deputies observed a lack of visible injuries on both the victim and the suspect, which would have backed up his story. According to Sheriff Grady Judd, who spoke with local station WFLA, Jackson had a post-incident wallet card instructing him what to say to law enforcement in the case of an arrest. In Judd's words, if he thought he could murder someone and use this as a get-out-of-jail-free card, he was sadly mistaken. The sheriff also said that Jackson had a history of brandishing weapons during confrontations and that he'd gotten into a fight with someone the day before the deadly shooting. He also had prior convictions for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, DUI, intentionally damaging a monument, and violating probation. Jackson now faces a second-degree murder with a weapon charge for the crime, but the case is ongoing. Number 14. Jilon De Soto. Wanting to enjoy his 43rd birthday with friends and family in 2021, Jilon De Soto rented some party equipment, including a beer keg. But during the party, there were issues getting the beer to pour, so Soto called the rental company, and they instructed him on how to start fixing the tap while they dispatched an employee to the address. But when he began fixing the tap, it exploded, causing metal fragments to go flying into the air. A shard of metal fatally struck Soto in the head, instantly turning his birthday into a tragedy for his wife, sister, teenage son, and the man's other loved ones. To make the situation even sadder, Soto's death came just a handful of years after he defeated cancer following a long battle with the disease. Authorities revealed that the brewery and delivery company involved in the incident were being questioned, and an investigation was being carried out to get to the bottom of what caused the incident. Attorney Jose Adelmo de Oliveira, who represented the equipment company, told the press that Soto was advised not to fuss with the keg until an employee arrived to fix it. And while his family told a different story, the outcome of the situation is unclear. Number 13. Naji Lan. Like many American cities, Buffalo, New York saw a troubling rise in violent crime following the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. By the late summer of 2021, there was an 82% spike in homicides compared to the year before, many of which resulted from shootings. Buffalo already had a decades-old problem with gun violence to begin with, so the post-COVID crime spike was especially concerning. The city marked its 50th homicide of 2021 with the tragic death of a young woman named Naji Lan, who was shot in the city's Black Rock neighborhood on August 16th. She was attending a relative's birthday party and had stepped out to go to a convenience store, but on her way back, someone opened fire on the teen, who was known among her friends and family for her gentle and caring personality. Her loved ones told local station WKBW that Lanya was the type of person someone would want to babysit their kids, not the kind of individual anyone would have a reason to shoot. Unfortunately, the shooter remains at large, adding to Buffalo's ever-growing list of unsolved killings. Police said that they believe the perpetrator had a connection of some sort with someone at the birthday party, and they're hoping that someone will come forward with information that will help lead them to the culprit. Crime Stoppers is now offering a reward of up to $7,500 for tips that lead to the arrest or indictment of a suspect. Number 12. Thomas John SLA Jr. A 32-year-old Billings, Montana man named Thomas John SLA Jr. stands accused of committing a violent crime spree just days into 2023. According to Yellowstone County prosecutors, SLA killed his first victim, 45-year-old single father of two, Carlos DeLeo, during a carjacking. Surveillance footage reportedly showed the suspect approaching DeLeo at around 6 p.m. while the victim sat in a pickup truck outside his home. Based on the video, the suspect opened the door, shot DeLeo, pulled him out of the vehicle, and then drove away. After fleeing the scene, SLA allegedly struck several parked cars and tried to enter numerous businesses before sneaking into the backyard of a house where a birthday party was taking place. According to court documents obtained by the Billings Gazette, an armed gunman later identified as SLA kicked down the back door and fell into the basement. At the time, there were at least 25 people in the house. 4 adults reportedly rushed downstairs and confronted SLA, who shot the homeowner, Eric Brady, in the chest. Thankfully, all 4 victims managed to escape the basement, and Brady ultimately survived his injuries. One of them stood at the top of the stairs with a gun, while the partygoers fled the house. SLA allegedly fired several shots as officers arrived at the scene, then barricaded himself in the basement. Law enforcement then deployed tear gas, prompting the suspect to flee from his hiding place. He attempted to evade arrest, but was quickly apprehended by SWAT team members and taken to the hospital for medical care. Court documents claim that SLA tried to escape yet again while at the emergency room, and even attempted to steal a probation officer's weapon during the ensuing chaos. But his efforts were in vain, and he was tased by a security guard and taken to jail. Records show that SLA has an extensive criminal history spanning 40 pages, which includes prior convictions for violent crimes. He now faces charges of deliberate homicide and attempted deliberate homicide, and he's being held on $1 million bail as the case works its way through the court system. Number 11. Deadly celebration in Dadeville. The 16th American mass shooting of 2023 came in April when 4 people were killed and 32 others were injured at a birthday party in Dadeville, Alabama. Between 50 and 60 people were attending the celebration at a local dance studio. Gunfire broke out. Everyone who died was 23 years old or younger and was just starting their lives, and some of the wounded victims sustained critical and potentially life-changing injuries. Keenan Cooper, who DJ'd the bash, told local station WBMA that the party had been stopped shortly before the shooting because of claims that someone there had a gun. An announcement was made asking anyone with a gun to leave, but nobody left and the party resumed. Amid the mayhem, some people took cover under Cooper's DJ table, while others fled the building. At least 7 guns and 89 shell casings were recovered from the scene. Included among the victims who died was high school senior Phil Dowdell, who was slated to play football at Jacksonville State University later in the year. The party was in honor of his sister Alexis, who credited Phil Stavius with saving her life by pushing her under a table when the shooting began. Phil Stavius' grandmother, Annette Allen, told the Montgomery Advertiser that her grandson was a humble kid who never started problems with people and always had a smile on his face. Or in other words, he was hardly the type who might have been anything other than an innocent bystander who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. The young man's mother, LaTonya Allen, was among those hurt by the gunfire. She was shot twice during the incident, but she survived. In addition to Phil Stavius Dowdell, the victims who lost their lives include 19-year-old Marcia Emmanuel Collins, 17-year-old Shankivia Kiki Nicole Smith, and 23-year-old Corbin Damontre Holston. Police have yet to announce a motive or what they believe led to the shooting, but they've arrested 6 people so far. The defendants that have been apprehended are 19-year-old Willie George Brown Jr., 20-year-old Johnny Latron Brown, 20-year-old Wilson Lamar Hill, and 3 others. They each face 4 counts of reckless murder, and 5 of the suspects reportedly admitted to firing guns at the party during police questioning. Much like their victims, the suspects are all young. Sadly, they may have thrown their lives away for a quadruple murder case. At the moment, all 6 defendants are being held without bail, pending the outcomes of their cases. Number 10. Another deadly birthday party in Alabama. Barely a month after 4 people were killed and 32 others were injured at a birthday party in Dadeville, Alabama in April 2023, a shooting broke out at another birthday bash in the Yellowhammer State. This time, gunfire erupted in the Birmingham neighborhood known as Baby Kingston, leaving 1 person dead and 3 others wounded. Police responded to calls of multiple people shot shortly after 10 p.m. They identified the victim who died as 36-year-old Roscoe Darnell Davidson. The 3 injured victims were taken to the hospital with the expectation that they'd recover. Officer Truman Fitzgerald told the Birmingham News that a handful of people were gathered outside an apartment complex when someone approached and began to shoot, firing around 20 times. According to witnesses, there was no argument or even a discussion before gunfire broke out. Fitzgerald seemed determined to get the shooter off the streets and confident that someone out there knows who is responsible for the carnage. In his words, "We know the streets talk, but for now, unfortunately, the suspect remains at large." Number 9. Terror in Tennessee. While responding to reports of gunfire during the early morning hours one day in January 2023, Nashville police found 18-year-old Taurus Oglesby laying on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds outside a vacation rental home. Unfortunately, Oglesby died from his injuries. He and another victim who survived with critical injuries were attending a birthday party when the shooting occurred at around 2 a.m. Shortly after the gunfire broke out, police encountered one of the 3 suspects, 19-year-old Andre Johnson, at a nearby residence. He remains in custody without bond on charges of criminal homicide, attempted criminal homicide, and 3 counts of aggravated robbery. Another suspect, Quandre Beasley, crossed paths with police minutes after the shooting while driving his mother's car. Beasley reportedly exited the vehicle with bullet wounds to the jaw and neck and was taken to the hospital for his injuries. He was later handed the same charges as Johnson. According to a police statement, detectives were perplexed as to why Beasley was even on the streets to begin with. Just months earlier, in April 2022, he reportedly escaped custody after complaining of seizures and being taken to the hospital in an ambulance. When the medical vehicle arrived at the emergency room, Beasley allegedly fled to a waiting getaway car. The jail employee who accompanied him to the hospital initially chased after Beasley, but was stopped by someone in a ski mask who got out of the waiting vehicle and indicated that he had a gun. Beasley was in custody on suspicion of armed robbery when he fled. A couple accused him of putting a gun to a woman's head and demanding money before running away with her purse and her male companion's wallet. 2 days after his escape from custody, Beasley was apprehended in the state of Georgia on charges of escape, vehicle theft, assault, evading arrest, and 2 counts of armed robbery. But despite all this, he was released at some point after being extradited back to Tennessee, enabling him to allegedly participate in yet another violent crime, this time with deadly consequences. A third suspect, 24-year-old Keyshawn Campbell, remained at large for more than 2 months following the birthday party shooting. But thankfully, he was finally arrested in late March and faces the same robbery and homicide charges as his co-defendants. Number 8. Dylan James Whippet. Thanks to the rash decision to shoot someone, a man from East Glacier, Montana named Dylan James Whippet marked his 25th birthday with an arrest that had the potential to put him away for the rest of his life. It all started when Whippet, several friends, and the 19-year-old victim, known only as John Doe, gathered at a home in the Bear Paw community on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, and according to federal authorities, there were drugs involved. While the exact events leading up to the shooting are unclear, several people reportedly became upset at Whippet and confronted him during the gathering. Whippet allegedly pointed a gun at one of his friends while they were all coming down from the drugs they'd consumed, causing the targeted individual to become scared. Everyone left except Whippet and John Doe, leaving the two alone together at the residence. 2 days later, John Doe's family found him dead at the home with gunshot wounds in the arm and the back of the head. Members of Blackfeet Law Enforcement Services informed the FBI, who then helped work the case along with multiple other agencies. According to a statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Whippet told investigators that he had a panther inside him and described himself as a weapon. When questioned about a motive, he reportedly said that he had ill feelings toward John Doe, who he accused of giving off death threat energy and looking at him with an evil smile. Whippet ultimately pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He could have been locked up for the rest of his life, but instead, he was sentenced to 11 years and 8 months in prison, followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. Number 7. Misha Barton. Actress Misha Barton is best known for her former role on the teen drama The O.C., but she's pretty much fallen off of Hollywood's radar in recent years. However, she graced headlines once again in 2017 for all the wrong reasons. The has-been starlet's name popped up in the news following the leaking of a viral video that appeared to show Barton rambling incoherently and falling in her yard. In the footage, she could be heard making multiple bizarre statements, including, "Oh my God, it's over. I feel it, and it's angry." During another part of the clip, she said, we're dying. I knew it. I don't want anyone to know. Oh my God, it's terrifying." The 31-year-old voluntarily checked herself into the emergency room at her concerned neighbors' urging after they found her screaming and in an obvious state of distress. But Barton was released the next day after staying at the hospital overnight. She quickly took to Twitter and responded to media requests for comments on her odd behavior, claiming that the popular assault drug GHB had been found in her system and that someone must have slipped it in her drink while she was out celebrating her birthday with friends. The actress told People magazine that she'd noticed herself becoming increasingly erratic and that it intensified throughout the night. Thankfully, Barton appeared to have come out of the situation without being seriously harmed, and she reported that she was doing well after receiving medical care. She saw her experience as a cautionary tale for other women about the dangers of being drugged and how easily it can happen. Some people doubted Barton's account of events, though. According to one source who spoke anonymously with TMZ, her mental health had been going downhill for the past year leading up to the strange incident. Her neighbors allegedly claimed that they'd overheard Barton having screaming and crying fits on multiple previous occasions. And while this doesn't mean that her story about being drugged is necessarily untrue, it calls the narrative into question. Either way, it sounds like her birthday didn't go as well as she likely wanted it to, which is unfortunate, regardless of what caused her to be upset. Number 6. Mass shooting in South Africa. In January 2023, international news headlines reported that 8 people had been shot dead during a birthday party at a residence in the South African port city of Gqeberha. 2 unidentified perpetrators entered the home and opened fire during the gathering on a Sunday evening, sparking an investigation and a manhunt in search of the suspects. The homeowner, 51-year-old Vusamzi Sishuba, was among the deceased victims. He was also the person whose birthday was being celebrated. The rest of the victims who lost their lives included 4 men and 3 women between the ages of 20 and 64 years old. Thankfully, though, at least 3 injured victims survived after fighting for their lives in the hospital. A spokesperson for the South African Police Service told the press that the agency was determined to bring the shooters to justice, vowing not to stop the search until they were identified and in custody. But unfortunately, their motive for committing the shooting is unclear, and the perpetrators remain at large. According to the BBC, South Africa has one of the world's highest gun crime rates, but random shootings are uncommon, making the birthday party massacre especially concerning. The mass shooting came just months after a string of similar shootings in multiple bars left dozens of people dead. 2 such incidents occurred in July 2022 when a group of armed men entered a tavern in Soweto and opened fire, killing 15 people. Hours earlier, 4 people were killed in a shooting at a bar in Pietermaritzburg. The 2 summer shootings came on the heels of a spate of unexplained deaths that happened at a tavern in London in the Eastern Cape province. 22 people lost their lives under circumstances that remain unclear to this day. It's not known whether authorities believe the crimes are connected, and at least for now, it appears as though they all remain unsolved. Number 5. Chaos in Colorado Springs. In an alarming act of violence among many that rocked the United States throughout 2021, a gunman opened fire at a birthday party in Colorado Springs because he was angry about not being invited. The incident occurred shortly after midnight at the Canterbury Mobile Home Park near the Colorado Springs airport, where 2 families had gathered to celebrate. Later identified as 28-year-old Teodoro Macias, the shooter walked into the gathering and began pelting the attendees with bullets before turning the gun on himself. According to police, Macias shot the victims in quick succession. In other words, he carried the crime out with the clear intent of executing those who were killed. 3 people called 911, including a neighbor who overheard the sound of rapid gunfire, and a person at the party who managed to escape the barrage of bullets. Among the victims who died were the person whose birthday was being celebrated, Macias's girlfriend, and the shooter himself. The victims were all adults ranging in age between 21 and 52 years old. While the younger party guests survived, they were subjected to the trauma of witnessing the shooting, and some were left orphaned. 33-year-old Mayra Ibarra de Perez and her husband, 30-year-old Melvin Perez, both lost their lives that day as well. Mayra's siblings, 28-year-old Sandra Ibarra Perez and 21-year-old Jose Gutierrez, were also among those killed. Sandra Ibarra Perez was identified as the shooter's girlfriend, and they'd been dating for about a year when the incident took place. The homeowner, 52-year-old Joanna Cruz, was described by a grieving neighbor in an Associated Press interview as a warm and hard-working woman who always took the time to greet her neighbors. 3 survivors avoided the gunfire only by sheer luck, having left the home shortly before the shooting to retrieve something elsewhere. The massacre was over by the time they returned, but they unfortunately weren't spared from the sight of what had happened. While they waited for the police to arrive, they tended to the younger party guests and attempted to render first aid to the wounded victims. All but one of the victims died at the scene, with the 7th victim succumbing to his injuries after doctors did everything in their power to save his life. Other party guests who'd left before all hell broke loose were spared from dying, but woke up the next morning to learn the painful news that they'd lost relatives. While Macias's motive for committing the shooting was initially unclear, it ultimately boiled down to his toxic relationship with one of the victims. In a statement to the press, Colorado Springs Police Chief Vince Niski said that the crime was rooted in domestic violence. He described Macias as having power and control issues and committing the horrific violence as an extreme reaction to not being invited to the bash. Macias had no criminal record, but he had a history of possessive behavior towards Sandra Ibarra Perez, which included trying to isolate her from her family. In this case, she apparently went against his wishes and attended a family event, and she and 6 others paid the price for it with their lives. While a lot of America's shootings happen in public, the case highlights the lethality of domestic violence, according to Police Chief Niski. He further pointed out that 20 to 25% of homicide victims stemming from domestic violence incidents are not involved in the relationship. Number 4. Darren Gray. In a needless act of violence that continues to haunt one family to this day, 24-year-old Darren Gray was fatally gunned down during a birthday party in Norfolk, Virginia in 2010. Gray and his girlfriend were attending the celebration at Lafayette Park in Norfolk on a Saturday afternoon without even a remote suspicion that the site would later become a crime scene. During the festivities, a man approached Gray and shook his hand, which appeared to serve as some sort of signal for a group of other men who followed and began beating Gray mercilessly. In a memorial dedicated to her son on the Moments That Survive non-profit's website, Roycinda Alexander described how as many as 20 people surrounded Gray while beating and stomping on him like a rag doll. According to Alexander, 2 people opened fire on the victim when he tried to get up off the ground, shooting him 9 times and giving him essentially no chance of survival. After that, someone allegedly hit Alexander's son in the face with a Grey Goose bottle, leaving the neck of the broken bottle in the young man's eyes. In the more than 13 years since, 4 of the men who participated in the beating have been tried and convicted, but the gunman remains unidentified and at large, even though the shooting happened in front of people in broad daylight. Speaking to local station WAVY, Gray's sister Shante Gray described it as a slap in the face to know that people know who the shooter is but refuse to implicate him in her brother's murder. According to the victim's loved ones, their family fell apart after the death of Gray, who they described as the glue that held them together. Detective John Smith, who worked the case the day it happened, is also in charge of working it as a cold case today. In 2022, he told WAVY that it's hard knowing that a family wants answers, and all law enforcement can say sometimes is that they've done all they can do. Authorities are hoping someone with information about the shooter's identity will eventually come forward and help bring the case to justice. Number 3. Samuel Parsons Salas. 25-year-old Maria Vera was out celebrating her birthday with family and friends at a Chicago nightclub in December 2022 when a heated confrontation broke out between several people. Someone hit her during the disagreement, and 32-year-old Samuel Parsons Salas was asked to leave the club. The drama likely could have ended right then and there, but several people decided to continue the discussion outside when Parsons Salas was kicked out. Angry that someone had hit his daughter, Mariah's father, 50-year-old Ricky Vera, approached Parsons Salas and demanded to know who had struck the young woman. The argument became even more intense as the men exchanged angry words. In an attempt to de-escalate the argument, Parsons Salas's 26-year-old girlfriend stood between him and Ricky Vera. But it was her own boyfriend who refused to listen to reason. In a fateful decision that was reportedly captured on camera, Parsons Salas allegedly retrieved a gun from his car and shot Vera in the head and chest. The onslaught continued as the gunman shot 26-year-old Mario Pozuelos multiple times, causing him to collapse on a curb. Parsons Salas then approached Mariah, who was kneeling over her father's body, and fired a bullet into her head. As Pozuelos lay dying, the gunman walked back over to him and shot him 2 more times. He then spotted Mariah's niece, 24-year-old Mercedes Tavares, hiding behind a van, and shot her as well. Sadly, Ricky Vera, Mario Pozuelos, and Mercedes Tavares died from their injuries. Mariah, on the other hand, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. It's unclear whether she's still alive, but according to the most recent update, she was still fighting for her life. Parsons Salas fled the scene, forcing his girlfriend to drive to his home at gunpoint. The young woman, who'd only been dating the alleged shooter for about 2 weeks, tried to escape by crashing the vehicle, but it didn't work. The suspect then held her hostage until the police came after him. Officers captured Parsons Salas after a brief foot chase and booked him on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of kidnapping. He allegedly admitted to the crimes during questioning and is being held without bail. His next court date is currently scheduled for July of 2023. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the crime is the fact that Parsons Salas had been released from prison just months earlier for an armed home invasion that left 2 people dead in 2009. The following year, while he was still at large for the armed robbery, he was arrested for assaulting a guard. He was apprehended for the armed robbery in 2014 and was sentenced to 8 years in prison as part of a plea deal after someone else was implicated in pulling the trigger. Parsons Salas was given credit for 4 years' time served, resulting in his release in September 2022. Hopefully, though, this time he'll stay behind bars where many believe he belongs. Number 2. Joey Harris. Cynthia Mose was celebrating her 56th birthday and holding a memorial event for her brother in 2020 when she was ruthlessly gunned down in East Palo Alto, California. After being alerted to the shooting via the ShotSpotter gunfire locator service, police responded to the scene and found Mose on the ground outside with multiple bullet wounds. Sadly, she died from her injuries at the scene, despite first responders doing everything in their power to save her. Witnesses implicated Mose's ex-boyfriend, 55-year-old Joey Harris, as the alleged shooter. The former couple, who were in the process of separating, had reportedly both shown up at the event for Cynthia's birthday and for her brother, who'd passed away a year earlier. And by that point, they dated on and off for 2 years, according to people who knew them. The prosecutors claim that Harris became jealous of Mose during the party. The pair began to argue, and at some point Harris reportedly went to his vehicle, retrieved a gun, and shot Mose in the chest and back. He then fled the scene in his car and went to his home in Stockton. Harris turned himself in at a local police station the next day and handed over the murder weapon. He was then taken into custody without incident on charges of murder and being a felon in possession of a firearm, which he pleaded not guilty to. He remains at the San Mateo County Jail on $10 million bail as his case proceeds through the court system. According to jail records, he's also been charged with having drugs or alcohol behind bars. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. Number 1. Dion Kirkland. In 2022, Tarsia Lysias celebrated her 44th birthday at an event space called Hearts of Love in Brooklyn's East New York neighborhood. The festivities were presumably winding down at around 5 a.m. when Lysias was shot. First responders found her unresponsive at the scene with a bullet wound to the head and rushed her to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. A neighbor who declined to be named told the New York Daily News that they were used to hearing music from the venue, but they were surprised that a shooting had occurred. They said that the business is well staffed with bouncers and that things usually don't get that far. The suspect, later identified as 44-year-old Dion Kirkland, fled the scene with the gun and the victim's wig after getting the weapon entangled in the woman's hair. According to witnesses, the disagreement began when Lysias ran over Kirkland's foot while riding a bicycle inside the building. A confrontation ensued, during which Lysias allegedly wielded a bottle in a threatening manner. According to authorities, footage showed Lysias trying to break the bottle against the ground 3 times before the encounter escalated to gun violence. Kirkland remained at large for several weeks before being located and taken into custody. During questioning, she reportedly denied shooting Lysias. Prosecutors told a much different story, though, claiming that Lysias backed down to Kirkland, who they claim pulled a gun and chased the victim before pulling the trigger. The judge overseeing the case reportedly acknowledged that Kirkland may have grounds to argue self-defense, but ordered her to be placed in custody without bail after she entered her not guilty plea to charges of murder, manslaughter, and a weapon-related count. Under New York state law, it's only legal to shoot someone if your life is in imminent danger, which means that you have literally no other choice. In other words, the person is about to kill you, and you can't run or realistically respond to the situation any other way. The burden of proof for proving self-defense is extraordinarily high in New York, even when someone has no prior criminal convictions. For Kirkland, who has 2 felony convictions, 9 misdemeanors, and 2 probation revocations under her belt, proving self-defense would be an uphill battle, to say the least. Her attorney nevertheless claimed that she's lived a law-abiding life. Unfortunately, the outcome of the case remains to be seen.
8. Linda Bishop. Single mother Linda Bishop was in her 40s when she developed a severe mental illness seemingly out of nowhere. She quit her job at a restaurant in New Hampshire, claiming that the Chinese mafia was after her, and began habitually disappearing for days or even weeks on end with her daughter, while giving false locations to loved ones from gas station payphones. Linda's family tried persuading her to get help, but she didn't think she needed it. In reality, she was becoming increasingly paranoid and delusional. And in 1999, she abandoned her daughter to live as a vagrant fleeing from the imaginary forces she believed were after her, which at that point included the government. Once in a while, Linda agreed to take medication and her state of mind improved dramatically. But she hated the pills because they hindered her creativity and made her feel like a zombie, and these periods of cooperation were few and fleeting. By 2006, she checked into a mental hospital. By then, her condition had landed her in trouble with the law on multiple occasions for volatile behavior, although she was never aggressive before she became symptomatic. She was released a year later after refusing to cooperate with treatment, and nobody informed her family due to medical privacy laws. Linda believed they were conspiring against her and wanted nothing to do with them, and unfortunately, they were powerless to recommit her to a long-term facility against her will due to the enormous burden of proof the law requires. Linda wandered outdoors until she came upon an abandoned farmhouse that was for sale. For the next 3 months, she lived on rainwater and apples from a nearby orchard. She kept a diary detailing her daily activities, which consisted mainly of sneaking out for apples after dark and hiding inside during the day. There were neighbors nearby who would have helped Linda if they knew she was hungry, in need, or there in the first place, but they had no idea, and Linda truly believed everyone was out to get her. The apple supply ran out when the bitter New Hampshire winter arrived, so there was no heat in the house. So, sadly, Linda passed away in the dark, cold home, weak, freezing, and malnourished, thinking it was the only safe place for her to be. 7. Dion Hastings. It wasn't uncommon for Dion Hastings to disappear on her family and friends for a few days at a time. Ever since being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she was very proactive about her mental health. She still experienced episodes from time to time, and sometimes she just needed to get away from it all. And so, the people in her life tended to respect her need for space as much as they reasonably could before beginning to worry about her safety. But they knew for certain that something was terribly wrong when the 34-year-old vanished from her home in Spokane, Washington in late 2015 and never resurfaced. Dion left a note behind for her boyfriend, stating that she was having a good day and had gone to the grocery store. For some reason though, she'd left behind her ID and money. Her car was found abandoned in a local parking lot with her purse and cell phone inside. Weeks later, someone found Dion's driver's license outside a grocery store. The following day, her credit card was used at a business just outside Spokane. Surveillance footage showed Dion buying vodka and birthday candles. Witnesses who crossed paths with her outside the store that day said that she was distraught and asked them for help, claiming she'd been drugged and kidnapped. Police and paramedics were called to the scene, and after speaking with Dion for a while, responding officers decided that they had no reason to hold her. She was seen on surveillance footage later that day walking with 2 men, who later claimed they met Dion for the first time that day and hung out with her for a while. One of the men, Randy Riley, was caught using her food stamp and debit cards. He claimed he'd left her alone along a roadside due to her belligerent behavior, and that he found her cards in the same place the next day. Dion is currently still missing. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was having issues getting her insurance to cover her medications. Until she's found, it's impossible to say whether her mental state contributed to her fate, although all signs seem to point toward it as a distinct possibility. 6. Denny Michael Rohan. In 1969, a 28-year-old Australian sheep shearer named Denny Michael Rohan traveled to Israel and volunteered at a kibbutz, where he and 40 others worked and studied Hebrew. The other volunteers noticed that Rohan was strange, but they were polite to him anyways. One night, Rohan began screaming out wildly in his room. He was having a religious experience of some sort that was so moving he couldn't contain his emotions. Nobody knew that Rohan had an extensive psychiatric history involving hallucinations and a 6-month hospitalization. They had no way to predict that his mental state made him especially vulnerable to a condition experts called Jerusalem syndrome, which is when tourists in Israel experience a psychotic episode marked by delusions of being a biblical figure or participating in a biblical mission. And the other volunteers certainly had no clue that just months later, Rohan would set fire to one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He believed he was preparing for the Second Coming, but he was actually stoking the highest level Middle East crisis since the Arab-Israeli War 2 years earlier. Rohan pleaded not guilty to the crime due to insanity and was subsequently deported from Israel. One of the latest suspected cases of Jerusalem syndrome came in 2017, when Irish tourist Oliver McAfee vanished in Israel's Negev desert. The 29-year-old traveled there to complete a pilgrimage on bicycle along the 631-mile Israel National Trail, but unfortunately he never returned home. Hikers found McAfee's tent, clothes, bike, and other equipment abandoned. Reported sightings continued, but search teams failed to find him. Volunteers helping with the search also came across passages that were torn out of the Bible and weighed down by rocks, as well as papers containing handwritten scripture and a makeshift chapel. The documents suggest that McAfee was performing unusual rituals and/or having a spiritual experience that isn't typical of even the most devout worshippers, indicating that perhaps he disappeared on purpose. His family disagreed that Jerusalem syndrome was a possibility, claiming that his mental state seemed fine before the trip, and instead suspected that he was the victim of foul play. Sadly, he remains missing to this day, so nobody can say for sure why he vanished. 5. Michael Boatright. In early 2013, a transient was found unconscious in a motel room in Palm Springs, California. He was taken to a local hospital, where he woke up and didn't know who he was. The man thought his name was Johan Ek, and he only understood and spoke Swedish, despite being found with documents identifying him as a 61-year-old US Navy veteran named Michael Boatright. With nowhere else to go, he lived at the hospital for several months. Any memories of his past, including the identities of his family members, failed to return. At one point, staff suspected Boatright was faking amnesia, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't trick him into speaking English or showing any sign that he understood it. Longtime friend Gifford Searles told Vice that Boatright had recently moved back to the US from China, where he was living and working as an English teacher until his visa expired. He never readjusted to life in America and soon became a drifter who struggled to get and keep a job. Searles implied that he believed Boatright was faking his amnesia, which seemed to be the general consensus at the hospital, but was a topic of conversation that people seemed to avoid. Boatright thought he'd fit in better in Sweden, so the Department of Social Services bought him a one-way ticket there and sent him on his way. Several months after arriving, he told the local press that he was happy in his new home in the port city of Uddevalla. Unfortunately, he was only in the country for less than a year before the sad and confusing final chapter of his life came to an end. 4. Rebecca Press. 31-year-old Rebecca Press was drunk, high on drugs, and had just found out that her recent ex had cheated on her when she lost control of her emotions during a night of drinking in Caerphilly, Wales in 2022. She just arrived back at her mother's house, along with her mum's best friend, 57-year-old Mark Ash, when they ran into Rebecca's brother. He was the one who told Rebecca about the affair, and afterward, all hell broke loose. Ash tried to calm the hysterical woman down, only to have a 3-inch knife plunged into his chest. After stabbing him, Rebecca fled and hid in a bush. Police arrived at the crime scene at around 2 o'clock in the morning, and they captured Rebecca about an hour later. She pretended to be surprised and acted like she didn't understand what was going on, but the police weren't fooled by her performance. Ash died from his injuries, despite doctors' best efforts to save him, and Rebecca was charged with murder. She argued in court that she acted in self-defense, and while the judge acknowledged that the murder wasn't premeditated, she concluded that Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing and acted with intent. As a result, Rebecca was convicted of the charge and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. 3. Tony Thomas. 45-year-old Tony Thomas was so passionate about the pigs he raised on his family's farm in Gwynedd, Wales, that he became infuriated when he discovered that his father, 65-year-old Dafydd Thomas, was thinking about bringing some more animals onto the property. Thomas was worried that the new animals would bring potentially life-threatening disease to the farm. He'd also stopped taking his bipolar medication more than a year and a half earlier and was in an especially agitated state of mind. No longer capable of containing his rage, Tony brutally attacked his father in March of 2021. He yanked Dafydd out of a vehicle and threw him to the ground, then proceeded to kick him and stomp on his skull. By the time Dafydd's wife discovered him and summoned help, it was too late to save his life. Tony was charged with murder, but denied killing his father. The judge ultimately dropped the murder charge due to Tony's mental health history and tasked the jury with considering him for a manslaughter conviction. He was found guilty, but with diminished responsibility, and was sentenced to indefinite psychiatric punishment. While doling out the punishment, the judge acknowledged that Tony was a serious offender, but said that he believes his condition is treatable and that he could possibly rejoin society someday. He'll remain hospitalized until or unless he's officially deemed to no longer be a threat to the public. 2. Neil O'Dowd. Pub manager Paul Smith was working at a bar in the Irish village of Baldoyle when a former employee, 35-year-old Neil O'Dowd, confronted him in early 2021. O'Dowd asked Smith why he went to Mauritius on his honeymoon. He hadn't, but O'Dowd was convinced that his former boss was somehow involved in the unsolved murder of an Irish woman in the country. Plagued by his own ill-conceived notions, the irrationally angry ex-employee stabbed Smith 19 times, smashed glasses over his head, and beat him with a mop handle. A worker tried to intervene, but there was little he could do to stop the unhinged, violent outburst. Smith was seriously injured and required emergency surgery, but miraculously survived the frenzied attack. Police arrested O'Dowd, who said during questioning that he heard voices in his head and thought his TV was bugged. He also brought up his belief in conspiracy theories and said that he remembered getting into a fight with Smith, but he couldn't recall what it was about. People who knew O'Dowd remembered noticing that he became increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to the murder. During his trial, the question wasn't whether O'Dowd committed the attack, but rather whether he understood the difference between right and wrong at that moment and knew what he was doing. They also tried to determine if he wasn't responsible for his actions due to his mental state. In the end, O'Dowd was found not guilty by reason of insanity in early 2023. The next steps will involve determining the correct course of treatment for his mental state, while also considering public safety. 1. Wang Saw. Terror ripped through the streets of Brooklyn in early 2023 when a man driving a U-Haul truck slammed on the gas and rammed into whatever and whoever was in his path. The rampage lasted for over an hour, leaving one person dead and 8 others injured. It finally ended when police managed to disable the vehicle. Officers arrested 62-year-old Wang Saw, who reportedly drove the U-Haul from Las Vegas, where he lives, all the way to New York City. He visited his son, who lives in Brooklyn's Bay Ridge neighborhood, and they apparently got into an altercation. At that point, police believe Saw experienced a psychotic break, which triggered the devastating massacre. The suspect allegedly claimed that he saw an invisible object pass toward his vehicle, which is thought to have triggered his episode. Some investigators have speculated that Saw had a death wish, but like it or not, he survived the needless violence, and he faces charges of second-degree murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Saw's criminal history consists of at least 8 prior arrests dating back to 2002, and includes allegations of evading police, domestic battery, battery with a deadly weapon, and more. However, it's unclear whether any details about his past can shed light on what triggered his most recent destructive act.
Would you rather have your outdoor birthday party completely rained out despite a sunny forecast but get a ton of amazing presents, or have the most enjoyable birthday party ever but have your gifts stolen? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!